Okay. Mindy, I know that was a big discovery for me with this work as well, that fine motor and graphomotor are distinct. Now I see it because I've been working with it for a long time, but yes. And the funnel effect, yeah, a lot of people were talking about that too, I noticed, in your reflections, in your discussion forum. Oh, Tracy, I saw you just for a second. Put the face to a name. Everybody else, feel free to take your time. We won't really start for probably till like 6:08. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. So for people who are just coming in, I have these questions that are posted that I'm about to move out of the way so you can see. And those, just asking you to read them, give them a little thought so I can kind of see where you're at the start of this course. And then just chat a response, right? So like anything new that's come up for you in week 1, and if you've taken a look at the slides for week 2, it's okay if you have not done that yet. My audio is going in and out. Is that better if I hold my phone to my, is this sounding better? So now I've asked 2 opposite questions. Yes, it sounds better. I'll just hold the phone up a little bit. Sorry, I think my my elbow was was on my phone. I apologize. If it's still not good, I'm not sure what to do about that. I apologize. I'll talk into it as much as possible. And then if it gets too frustrating over the course of this hour together, just tell me again, and I'll see what I can do. Veronica, yes. I'm very glad to hear that, and I saw that reflected in that week 1 discussion forum. You and several members of this group seem to take to the idea of neuromotor function for parent-teacher conferences. I feel like especially those in primary grades, which makes a lot of sense. Okay, we'll take about 2 more minutes. Good. Mm-hmm. Be right back. Mm-hmm. Mindy, that's really interesting. Yes. Yeah, okay. What Mindy's writing is speaking to decision making in terms of accommodating and working on strengthening weaknesses in lifetime. It's important. All right, we'll start in like 1 more minute. So, you know, I've watched that Craig Pullman video multiple times, and I've read the chapter multiple times, but I'm seeing this, like, can someone describe to me what exactly happened when he said, what did he say about the funnel effect? That's not a featured kind of point of knowledge that I usually kind of highlight for participants in this class or in the PDs that I lead, but I'm noticing it seems powerful for people. Several people have mentioned it. Oh, got it. Okay. Like how you get from what you think to what you are actually, how you're showing that and what you're doing. Right, so if kids can only write the... Oh, yeah, okay, sure, that's huge, no wonder. Great. Yeah, that's the... he calls it funnel effect just in the video, or does he say funnel effect in the book also that I should follow up on? And if you're not sure, it's okay. I just picked up the book to see if it's in there. In the book only, I think. Oh, okay. See, I'm going to look right now. I just want to make sure I know exactly what you all are talking about with it, so I don't mislead anyone in any way. All right. Let's see, he talks about expression, not cognition, but I found that wording a little confusing. Yeah, me too. That's why I'm trying to look for the book for you. Perfect. Mm-hmm. Got it. So there's an internal, I'll do a very brief kind of departure from the task just to follow up. For anyone who hasn't been reading what Mindy's chatting to me as I was asking about the funnel, please read her couple posts. My guess is there's like a whole line of thinking that's actually rooted in Vygotsky's work, but it doesn't typically get shared in teacher preparation programs. But there's a whole kind of world of work around thinking existing in language. And so if you think about cognition, he's probably coming from the frame that cognition occurs, not entirely, but largely through language. And so the difficulty is with the output of the language, but that doesn't necessarily suggest or indicate that the language operating in the head as thought is problematic. Yeah, he's So I'll look at those pages when I can. I don't want to hold up our whole thing, but thank you all, because I noticed it in your discussion forums from week 1. A lot of people also really resonated with this idea of the funnel, and then it's just the concept is one I'm quite familiar with, but that word for it I hadn't seen in a while, I think. Anyway, I'll follow up with that. I'll read it on my own. If there's something different I want to add to it, I will share that with all of you. But hi! Welcome to Course 4! I've missed you, and I really hope that Course 3 was valuable, and that people got some kind of new insights out of that, and you enjoyed your time with Phyllis. But now I'm back, and I'm happy to see, or not see you, but know that you're here. And I've been reading, I read your week 1 discussion forum just to kind of take a temperature of where people are at, and I was just really pleased to see a few things. One is how very nicely people are finding ways to connect what we're doing in this course to your own practice. And so there was a lot about parent-teacher conferences being supported through this work, and that it just brings a great joyful feeling to me. And the other is I noticed that there were also some insights about interpreting students' behaviors and difficulties and handwriting in particular, handwriting outputs in new ways after thinking a bit about neuromotor function, and that is really great and important to do. So I just thank you all for your thinking and your participation and your sharing your ideas. So course 4 has these 2 topics. We're going to talk about neuromotor function, right, and social cognition. This course in particular with these 2 constructs is my favorite of the neurodevelopmental framework for lots of reasons, but a big one is what people are already starting to pick up on, which is the interaction between neuromotor function, social cognition, and the other constructs that are typically featured in a very explicit way at school. Often, neuromotor function and social cognition are constructs that are silently operating to make life more difficult for some students, to support other students, and to kind of complicate matters of learning. So I personally enjoy an opportunity to kind of drill down into thinking about how those constructs are at play in lessons, in learning tasks, in assessments that we offer kids, hence the interest in the funnel effect. And so I'm just excited to be able to work with you guys over the next 6 weeks on that. Can I say, did I drop out? Is that what happened, Mindy? So yeah, oh, gosh. I think what I was saying is neuromotor function and social cognition are often kind of silently at play and interacting with the other constructs. But the other constructs like memory and attention and language and ordering are typically the ones that stand out as most explicit in school. However, neuromotor function and social cognition can really monkey wrench a kid's experience, and so I think they're just, for me, interesting to think about in terms of kind of close observation and honing in on where kids struggle and where they need support. Okay? Yeah, it's invisible. Exactly. So it is and isn't, right? So, there's yeah, I mean, neuromotor function, also there's a developmental trajectory that is assumed kids will follow. And there are certain primary grades where some aspects of neuromotor function, in particular graphomotor and fine motor function, but really also gross motor, as I was reading in your discussion forums, and oromotor, but that's a lot more rare for a student's particular difficulty to be exclusively oromotor. But those functions can really support or constrain what kids are doing, but they are not addressed as crucial as they are. There are a few people I know who already did some of the activities from the week 2 slides. There's an activity in there that will give you an opportunity to experience handwriting difficulty. And I personally found that activity extremely powerful for allowing me to really see school through a struggling student's eyes and just realize the enormous demands placed upon neuromotor function, which isn't something that they typically test for in a very academic achievement-oriented way and or address. But there's a ton that can trip up a kid, and there's lots of strategies to support kids too. So yay, and welcome to Course 4. Okay, so we have a few things we're going to go over tonight, and I think we should just get started. I want to show you a little bit of the layout of the course, and then I'm going to alert you a little bit to some parent resource, to a parent resource document that's actually on our Moodle page, and there are ways that teachers can use it as well. So hopefully you'll get some value out of that also. Yeah, Anita, right? Writing with a non-dominant hand, it is difficult. Yes. And then I like activities like we're talking about the week 2 activity, everyone who hasn't done it yet. I like that activity a lot because especially when working with young children, it is so difficult to remember what it's like to actually not have sound symbol correspondence yet, or really to not be secure in number facts to 10, or to not be able to read fluently and have it be exhausting. So that exercise with the non-dominant hand is, to me, a real window into life as a kid for handwriting, but just in general as well, how challenging the tasks that I take for granted can be for kids. And it really opens up a lot of inspiration in terms of looking for alternative outlets for kids to access content and to express what they know. Okay, so I feel like there was something else I wanted to tell you before I move on, but I can't remember what it was. If I remember, I will come back. Oh, I have a question for you. That's what it was before I move into telling you anything about this course. Is there, and this is going to be like a very open question for you all, but because we're just launching and it's week 1, is there, this is our last of the content constructs. Is there anything in these next 6 weeks that you want to make sure we either kind of like go over again or emphasize or would be most contributing to your practice? So for example, I saw in some of the posts, I believe it was James, was asking for kind of more strategies to support kids with a graphomotor weakness. So that would be someone who's looking for like additional classroom strategies for supporting. If you have in your head at this point something that it doesn't look like is already kind of planned for that you would like to get out of this course for, let me know. And then I can work it in the next few weeks. I'll give everyone a second for that. And that's really very open, just like what would you like? Additional strategies for fine motor. Great. Perfect. So we want fine motor strategies. I'm already going to put graphomotor strategies because somebody's already asked for it. Different age groups. Tracy, do you mean a particular age group that's different than young kids, or do you mean like a spectrum? Older students. Okay. Specifically for everything or just graphomotor? High school. Okay, great. So, strategies for older kids. Perfect. Graphomotor for older kids. Older kids. Okay, Mindy, I'm seeing anti-bullying resources. I have a feeling, I have a bunch, and I have a feeling your other peers here may, and a lot of schools have stuff that leverage social cognition, of course. Great. Perfect. Okay. I will kind of get to work on trying to find some very nice resources for all of you for that stuff. These two constructs in particular, they tend to have, they don't have a kind of direct curricular connection in such obvious ways as like language would or higher order cognition activities. So that's partly why we go seeking out additional resources for kids. But we can also, when we get to social cognition, we'll talk a bit about grouping and in-class activities that support appropriate and positive social development. So we'll be able to work on that also through instruction and then in addition to instruction. Okay. All right, let's go over the syllabus a little bit, if that's okay, and then we'll come back and we'll take a look together at those parent resources and see if we can start thinking a bit more about how to use those resources and leverage them in the classroom as well. So I'm assuming most people, or I don't know, I shouldn't assume anything. I don't know if people have or have not yet looked at the syllabus, but I am going to just walk through a couple aspects of it so that then I can answer any questions if you have them, and then we will move on. I'm not going to read the syllabus to you because you can read it on your own, but I did want to show you what the major assignments are. Everything is similar to how it's been done over these last courses with the change of the night for our Zoom sessions. I'm teaching a class at UCI and it's on Wednesday nights, so I apologize. I cannot meet these next 4 times on Wednesday, and I appreciate everyone's flexibility with that. If you ever can't make it due to your own arrangements, of course, just view the recorded session. Other than that, our assignments are as follows. You'll have either a discussion forum or a quick write 5 out of the 6 weeks. There's 1 week that you have a reprieve. I believe you have 2 assignments due that week. Then you have 4 weekly assignments. You've already done one for week 1. That's where you were saying the classroom tasks that are place high demands on one of the components of neuromotor function. And then there's going to be another learning activity project. It's different than the one in fall, but it has also bears a few similarities. So I want to go over that with you now. And it's in 3 parts, just like the fall was, and it will build just like the fall did. So here it is. So there's three part 1, part 2, part 3, and I believe it's due in weeks 3, 5, and 6. If I'm not mistaken. It's definitely clear on the Moodle page. And this one is really asking you to pick a target student you want to think about, not take a look at your whole class and the needs. It's focused in on more of an individual and the kinds of strategies for support that would serve that person. So I want to give you a heads up because we're going to be looking at the same person for neuromotor function and for social cognition. So it does not mean you must select someone that struggles in both neuromotor function and social cognition. You could select a student that has a strength in one of those areas from your interpretation and a weakness in a different one of those areas. You could select someone that has weakness in both of those areas if you would like, or a strength in both. That is really up to you. But the reason I want to give you a heads up now is when you're selecting the person, I want you to know that you're going to stay with them for several weeks and that you're also going to think about that student in terms of social cognition. So it should be someone that you feel like there's something to think about there or that you're interested in thinking about. So part 1 will be just a description of the student with an emphasis on the relative strengths and challenges in neuromotor function because that's what we're working on. Part 2 will come after we've been introduced to the content of social cognition, the construct, and you're just going to update, very similar to the fall. You're going to add on to what you've already written, just another paragraph or so, describing that student's social cognition from your interpretation. And then in part 3, you're going to design or describe. You don't have to create it out of nothing. You could pull something that connects to this purpose, or you can create something. But you're gonna see what learning activity might support the needs of the target student. So you can either use a strength to support a challenge, or scaffold to bypass an identified weakness. If you chose someone that you think has strengths in both of those areas, you could choose to extend a strength. But it's unlikely. Typically people choose a kid that is struggling in one or both of those areas, which I would suggest. I won't stop you if you really want to think about someone else, but it's more likely a more fruitful assignment for you if you pick someone that has a weakness in at least one of those 2 constructs. And that'll be that. Are there any questions about that assignment or the 3 parts of it? Sweet. Okay. Well, if you have any questions about it at any point, ask me. It should be. It's intentionally supposed to be straightforward, so I hope it is. Okay, great. So that is kind of the main distinction, or the main thing I wanted to point out to you in the syllabus for this time. Oh, sorry. Do you report back on using? No, that's a great question, Mindy. Because of the length of these courses, no. Because that's actually the final assignment, is to implement the strategy. However, if you have a strategy you would like to implement with a student earlier, like a graphomotor support for a student or a fine motor support, I highly encourage you to let us know what happens with it, or I'm more than happy to like help you with how to collect data on that. Final assignment, like in course 5, just trying to adapt since I don't have. Oh, got it. Yeah, no, you won't have to. No. Got it. Yeah, no. Okay. If you want to, and we can talk offline about that too. If this assignment is problematic for you because you're not with kids right now, then let me know, and we'll take a look at. We can find some kind of other ways for you to approach the assignment. Okay. All right. Good. That was tapping my memory. I'm doing an inquiry process with another class I'm teaching, and this would be a good inquiry question. Okay. So I heard people start to touch upon it a little bit, and before I go into these parent resources, I want to just kind of ask for people's thoughts. So there's these dimensions, right? There's like this, we've all had a little bit of exposure at least to what it can look like for students who are struggling with neuromotor function at school, and or the kind of quiet but important impacts of particularly graphomotor function, but also fine motor, gross motor, and oromotor function. So what I was thinking might be kind of useful is to pick up on some of what I saw highlighted in people's discussion forum responses, which is the impacts on students' academics related to neuromotor function. So neuromotor challenge impacts on academics, but then there's also behavior in the classroom, and this kind of social emotional experience of students. So what I kind of ask you to do is, someone's more than welcome to talk live if you'd like, but I'm curious what kinds of thoughts you're having on, let's start with behavior. For a student who's struggling with neuromotor function, and it could be graphomotor, let's pick, it could really be any of them. What kinds of behaviors do we see in the classroom? Or what are like some new ways we might interpret, like what behaviors might emerge that we could now start to interpret as potentially related to challenge as opposed to related to just being challenging? What might we see kids do? Yeah, Susie, work avoidance. How come? Can you expand just a little bit? Tracy, not writing anything down, which often gets interpreted as avoidant. Yeah, so the kids just opt out if they can. Whining and crying when asked to complete a task. Yes. So then the kids, can you remind me what grade level you're with the little kids, right? Yep. Scribbling all over the sheet, Kate, yes. We're not showing what they know. Yeah, so that starts to take this real toll, right? We have a child who might have ideas in mind but can't express them. And then they may just choose not to engage in the task, or choose to engage in it at the minimum level possible, which then starts to have ramifications for their academic success. This quote, "In my experience, the most frequent trigger of behavior outbursts in schools is a request to do work." What does this phrase usually mean? Write something. Yes. Distracting others so they're not doing work. Exactly. So this is what I love about thinking about neuromotor function, because if it turns out that kid, look at this kid we're describing, right? We have someone who's distracting others, right? So they're not the only ones not doing work. They're kind of hiding their struggle by getting the group involved. There's someone who's just making a big mess of their paper and scribbling all over the sheet. They're just kind of doing the bare minimum, or crying. At younger grades, you often see kids crying and sometimes temper tantruming. Left unaddressed, that can start to lead down all kinds of pathways of interpreting what's going on with that student, right? So this is what is really important about making sure we're using these kind of lenses of neurodevelopment to really figure out what's going on with a kid. I want to tell you a brief story about what happened to me this fall with my own son, who has, as it turns out, a graphomotor and a fine motor challenge. He is in kindergarten. He was that kid that I'm seeing somehow describe these outbursts with requests to do work, the write something one, right? So I started getting these calls, as soon as he started kindergarten in the fall, about his challenges and his temper tantrums. and his uncontrollable behavior, which was completely distinct from the child that I knew at home. Now, you all know me enough to know that I have some background in the field, right? Exactly. So I'm saying exactly because I saw Mindy's comment, but so I was kind of at a loss as to what was going on with my son, and I started to, be concerned and go in and observe him in the classroom, and the teacher would tell me about he'd have these meltdowns all the time, but he's not a person that has meltdowns at home. So eventually, we took him to several different kinds of screenings. It was suggested to me that he's oppositional, he has ODD. It was suggested to me that he's impulsive. It was suggested to me that he may be on the autistic spectrum. He may have a spectrum-like disorder. Lots of things were suggested. Right, and he was in the beginning of kindergarten, which I found to be a premature time to kind of diagnose a kid. I also thought, although, of course, there's a potential that I was in denial, I have enough experience in the field that I thought I decided to trust my instincts a bit. Long story short, we ended up taking him to a mental health screening, and that exact quote, this is what triggered my own thinking. The woman that did our intake was a wonderful person and talked to us for a long time, and the first thing she said is a tantrum is not a tantrum. A tantrum is always a communication of something. And so she was the first person to say to us that it made all the sense in the world that he would tantrum at school and not at home, because her suspicion was that he had some amount of anxiety. And so, of course, he's not anxious in the same ways at home. He's with his family. But that also she suspected he had some kind of sensory integration challenges, and that the classroom was in one or several ways overwhelming or unbearable to him. So with that, I started looking at what he was communicating through those tantrums. And I wanted to lean in and share this with you tonight because I know a lot of you are teaching kindergarten, and I also know a lot of people are in early grades. And those are the grades where you start to see these kinds of behaviors that can be interpreted in multiple ways. And when I shifted my lens to start looking at his behavior as a communication about his experience of learning, and I just maintained the assumption that he wants to participate because he's a little kid and, he wanted to participate and learn. Then it became my job to look for where the struggle lay and what was the source of the struggle. So I will share, maybe not that document with you right now. I'll do it next week. But I ended up getting some supports for him in place, mostly graphomotor support. So I give him dots on the page to help orient him for how to form his letters. He uses a pencil grip. I go through his pages with him ahead of time to mitigate the anxiety. He has adaptive scissors, and we also take him to OT every week. With those supports in place, it's been a 180 turnaround. They're no longer asking. It was suggested I had him assessed. They're no longer asking to have him assessed. He's basically thriving in the classroom. It's been about 3 months since we've been doing this work with him. And the power of a strategically implemented academic intervention, especially one for graphomotor function, is never to be underestimated. That was the lesson I learned this fall, so I just wanted to share it with you. Adaptive scissors, I've never heard of. Yeah, Veronica, I hadn't heard of them either. I will look if I don't think they're on the parent resource. I'm looking if I have them. I'm sitting at my son's desk. Oh, I brought them to school. I'll bring some and share them with you next week. The thing that's cool about adaptive scissors, well, there's a few different forms I've used. With kids that have very, very limited motion, I've seen them where they're almost like a stapler that you kind of just push a lever down on the top and it cuts that way. So you have to move the paper to the side, but then the child can just use a kind of larger motor movement to manipulate it. The ones my son has have a spring load in them. So here's a pair of scissors. These are not the same, but they're kind of always automatically in this open position. And then the child squeezes them from the outside, and then it springs back open. And then they squeeze, and it springs back. Oh, did you find one, Mindy? Thank you. That's better than my explanation there. Thank you. Beyond Play Catalog. Yeah. They're really fascinating. Oh, I've never seen battery-operated scissors. That sounds exciting. Is that like you just move the paper through, Linnell, and it works for you? Sorry, I have to plug in my computer. Hold on. Okay. Oh, Veronica, I had never heard of them either. I mean, I'd seen the adaptive scissors that I'd used with kids, the ones that you push down on, but the ones for my son I hadn't seen, and I've been working in special ed a long time. I need those. I need them too. Some of our paras will help students by either holding the paper. Yeah, and so that's another way to accommodate the kids, right? It just takes more human power than the others. So yeah, I mean, there's just all kinds of this work that went on the back end, right? So it's not just the scissors that helped him. It's not just, you know, having a pencil grip, but it's figuring out what it is that he needs is where a lot of that work lies. And that I found the gen ed teacher was really not able at that time to identify for him. She was interpreting his behaviors as oppositional or avoidant or impulsive. So therefore, the supports that they offered him in the classroom were ones you would offer to a student who was hyperactive, oppositional, and impulsive. So he had a break area to go to. He had reduced workload. He had opportunities to leave the classroom if he needed to kind of get his wiggles out. Unfortunately, my son, that didn't match his needs. And because he's also has a fair amount of anxiety, it actually disrupted him to put him in, like have him go outside. That made him nervous and anxious that he wasn't getting his work done. He didn't want to go in the break area because he wanted to be with the other kids in the class, and that provoked anxiety for him that would then escalate. So it was a really interesting experience because what I realized was the very efforts to support him were actually causing more difficulty. And it wasn't from lack of goodwill and it wasn't from lack of effort, but it was from lack of awareness and tuning in closely to what's happening with him, which is exactly the work that we're doing in these courses over this year, is trying to offer you some information and a framework for how to closely observe kids to figure out what it is that's going on with them so that you can strategically implement supports, and then everyone goes home smiling. Right, so I'm reading Mindy's comment. The story is so bittersweet because many of the parents we serve would not get the chance to speak to someone like that and have an enlightened conversation. Yes. How to advocate. Correct. Yes. So Mindy's saying, yeah, so we have to step it up as behavior detectives and excellent assessors. That's my strong feeling. And I wish there was a substitute for that because it's a lot of responsibility left to the teachers, general ed and special ed teachers and specialists. But I have not found a substitute that is effective any better way than really knowing a kid. And the way to know a kid is to closely observe and spend time. Right. Oh, okay. Mindy, yeah, I can, it's not proprietary. I have documentation of this that's really interesting too. Good that I work with. So this is the thing. Yeah, and Nina, what I didn't mention, I should next week give you I'll give you more of the backstory, but so I also went through the SST process this fall because of this. And it was eye-opening to sit in that process from the parent side as opposed to the teacher side. And it was eye-opening in very unpleasant ways, frankly speaking. So one of the ways is I realized how, I knew it intellectually, but the emotional charge of those meetings for me as a parent and for my husband was really intense. And I knew it before, but you know, it's a little different when you fully experience it. So I have a lot more empathy for families now. I thought I had empathy before. Now it's in a different place now. And also, you know, I was met with pushback for my suggestions, and it was very hard to take at some level. Like I was asking too much by asking for dots on the page for him. That's not in the, right? Because that's not what they do at the school. So that kind of meeting in the middle and finding a shared perspective of what's going to serve the kid was really elevated to me as like the most crucial aspect of those meetings. Okay. He's not just I know. So, Yeah, no, that's right, and I appreciate it. So I also think that the teacher. So here's the thing: I'm obviously a unique parent, right? I have this knowledge. I teach this course. I have the son. I can take him to the doctors. I have a lot of resources at my hand. I have a lot of people I can call and get advice from. Of course, that is not common for parents. So if you're with a family and the family doesn't have the background that I do, which would be extremely rare, the person that is then kind of the next line of advocate is, of course, us, the teachers, the specialists, and people that really know that child. So I think that's also why it resonated with me when I saw that people said that at conferences it felt helpful to be able to talk about neuromotor function with parents, and I think that arms them a bit with the education that they will need to be able to advocate for their kid, and also is potentially, hopefully, a way for you to be able to communicate effectively. How did any of those have people had those conferences? Because I read the discussion forum from week 1, but of course it's week 2. Did anyone talk about any of these constructs with parents at the conference? And if so, would you share? If not, it's okay. But I can't remember who. I feel like Veronica said she was going to. It was a little positive. Yours are coming up still. Okay, ours were last week. Yeah, and I mean, you don't have to, but if you do, it might. Oh wow! First week of April. Okay, still time. Your year probably goes later than mine. Okay. Oh great. Okay. Well, if anyone has those conferences before the end of this course and you can report back to me, I would be very curious, and I think your peers would as well. It's not an obligation. Perfect. Perfect. Yeah. So let me show you then the parent document as you guys are putting together your ideas. Right. In my experience, when you bring up this detailed info, the first question is, what can we do? How can we help? Of course. That's exactly, yes. Yes, so that's the purpose of these this parent document that is up for everyone to find. If you go onto the Moodle page, it's at the top, and you've had them offered for all, if not almost all, of the courses that you've been in so far. And so this is Parenting the Child with Motor Challenges, and it has a bunch of strategies. It has some strategies in here that are very obviously kind of school connected, and some that are less so. So, I would encourage you, we created this so that you could just hand them out to a parent. So if you were at a conference and you had a family of a child that clearly has a motor challenge, this would be potentially a useful resource. If you have a parent who's not aware that their child has a motor challenge, as professionals, of course, we'd want to make sure they were comfortable with a document that says motor challenges at the top, But, if you're the first person mentioning it and it seems like the parent is receptive to what you're saying, or what you're saying is resonating or connecting with their own observations of their kid at home, this document can be really helpful. So, and I don't know how many of you know Ivor Weiner. He's at Cal State Northridge. He's a wonderful person and very knowledgeable in the field. So there's some potential strengths for kids with motor challenges. They develop skills in other areas often. And then here are these. So these are some home strategies that a parent would be interested in, and I'll let you read those on your own, but I wanted to kind of skim down. These are the ones that I think when I got there, I thought, oh, okay, a parent's going to really want to look at this. So some of these are just, you could say were supports for behavioral issues that were not exclusively related to neuromotor function, right? So catching your kid being good. Rewards that interest the child. Fine. Sleep, I'm going to skip over. This is the one that I thought has a nice crossover from home to school, because some of these same supports are useful in the classroom and also might be a way to connect with parents when you're in conversation with them, especially if their student is not thriving at school. There's likely an issue with homework at home as well. So some of it is breaks. And those breaks are not just in the kind of attention-related break, but they are often for fatigue, especially with writing. If you think about for those that have not yet done the non-dominant note-taking task, it will likely become quite clear why breaks are important for a kid with a graphomotor struggle. For people who have, perhaps you have. extra time. And then there's keyboarding, right? So those, for example, with my son, I am starting to show him how to orient his hands on the keyboard because his handwriting's coming along, but I have a feeling he's going to be a person. He's very verbal. He's fairly articulate, I think. And my guess would be, from experience in the classroom, that his motor skills will hold back his written expression, much like Craig Pullman was talking about. And so I want to get him kind of prepared and comfortable with the keyboard as early as I can so that he can supplement with that. Okay, wait. So, oh wow, there's a bunch of questions. So I have a question about your story again, Veronica. Just wondering how seeking a mental health specialist as well as an OT came about. Great question. Yeah, so I will stop and answer that now because it might come up in conferences. That came up because there was an incident in the fall when I got many phone calls from the teacher, and I was asked to visit the school and pick him up a bunch of times. One of the times, she said that either my husband or I had to join them on a field trip because she was worried that my son wasn't going to be safe either with himself or with others. And that was kind of like a line in the sand for me, that it had gone too far and that there was something terribly wrong. He's my son. We're all biased with our kids, I think, but my son is one of the sweetest, most gentle people I know. He's one of those, right? Like, he's a hugger. He's a sweet, sweet boy. And so if he was at the point where he seemed to be a physical threat to himself or others, I knew something was terribly wrong. So, and I couldn't figure it out. So I set up the mental health appointment with I have Kaiser Health Insurance, it's HMO. So I set up that appointment for him. And that was where, at the intake screening, she suggested that we take a look at him as potentially having anxiety and get an OT screening as well. Often the same kids that are assessed for ADHD would benefit from a sensory screening, but it's not always covered by health insurance, so it's a little tricky to recommend. I would suggest yourselves if you're interested, go online and look at some of the sensory scales that the sensory avoidant and sensory seeking behaviors, and then you can start to just think about your kids in those terms and see if that seems like something you want to suggest. For the young students, especially curious about the question of work arounds versus practice. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a fine line. So these are two different questions I'm reading. Veronica's question I want to continue with first just because I just answered it, and then Mindy, I'll go back to what you were saying. It's a really touchy thing. I'm not sure in different districts and schools what the policies are. Typically, a teacher really should not suggest any screening or anything that will cost the family money outside of school is typically not something a public school teacher can suggest to a parent for the purpose of supporting them in the classroom for IDEA and special education services and all those kinds of reasons. So I don't have a good answer for that. I wish I did. I will find out though, and I will ask. I'll ask in my own community this week, and I'll see if I can get back to you. I would suggest for you, Veronica, if your conferences are coming up, talk to your principal or administrator, and if that person is good listening, and or your special ed teacher, and ask about that before you make that suggestion to a family. No, so regional center maybe. So Mindy, I said that students who are suspected of having ADHD, there's a lot of crossover is what I really mean. So that's why I don't want to imply or suggest or say directly that kids that seem to have ADHD have sensory issues, because that is I'm not that version of a specialist. What I did learn this fall, and I knew anyway, but I also learned from experience, is that there's a huge amount of overlap between the behaviors that are interpreted, that the same behaviors can qualify a student for ADHD, but also may be connected to indicators of sensory integration difficulty. I don't fully understand why. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not an occupational therapist, but I have definitely noticed a lot of overlap between those two categories. And so I've also seen, as I was doing my own research on kids with sensory issues this fall, a lot of families, a lot of kids that have ADHD and also have sensory issues. A lot of kids with sensory issues also have ADHD. Some kids, like my son, was going down a path of qualifying potentially for having ADHD, but with occupational therapy, the need for that has drastically reduced to the point of it not being an issue. So I don't fully know. I'm trying to figure it out too. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Veronica. Okay, yeah, exactly. And Veronica, regional center might be a place if the parents are interested, but I honestly don't know those. I don't know enough about what you can and can't say as a public school teacher in your district to parents, and recommendations Mindy might or someone else might. Okay. So, yeah, comorbidity, exactly. So there's all kinds of stuff. In autistic spectrum disorders, there's also a ton of sensory overlap. So a lot of kids that are diagnosed as having a spectrum disorder also have sensory integration difficulties. And those tend to also overlap with neuromotor function. And it's blurrier than is ideal, but it's also a burgeoning side of the field. So this is new information coming out over time, and I find it interesting. Okay, so Mindy has this other question. Wow, we're almost done too. I can't believe how fast these sessions go. Mindy's question is one that is likely relevant to everyone. So there's this kind of general challenge to accommodating students in terms of the workaround. So if we provide a workaround, is this initial skill getting even weaker? The classic example of that is a keyboard for a student with graphomotor function weakness, right? And my short answer from experience is, yeah, it's not necessarily making the graphomotor function weaker, but it's certainly not going to be strengthening graphomotor function to be keyboarding. However, in the daily life of a classroom, there are different learning goals that come up at different moments. And so when I was a classroom teacher in an inclusive setting and I had kids with graphomotor difficulties, I made strategic choices about when were the moments that I wanted to accommodate a student and bypass the weakness for the purpose of a different learning goal, such as written expression, expressive language, putting together a persuasive essay, creating prose and poetry, something like that. I would accommodate the weakness and bypass it by offering a different tool, dictation, a keyboard, something like that. However, that student also needed opportunities to have what we call in this framework an intervention that works directly to strengthen the weakness. And that might look like tracing letters with handwriting practice. And that could occur at a time when other students were recopying a document recopying an essay, and that child, I had bypassed their weakness by giving them a keyboard. Then during the time when everybody else is recopying their final essay, I can just print out that person's final essay and give them handwriting practice to strengthen the weakness. So that's really just strategic choice making about making sure that the child could access the learning goal of the lesson or the activity. There's no good answer. There's no blanket answer to that, and it's a lot of it has to do with decision making about what's the primary purpose of a task. Right, exactly. It's like balanced literacy. Yeah, it's exactly right. It's the same thing. So, and that's what I love about this work. Yeah, and it's targeting skills at different times. Oh, Veronica, some of the scales. No, but I just found one for some the other night. I will email you that. Let me write that down too. So, Veronica, I need OT stuff. I need sensory scales. I'll email you one after here. No problem. Wow, there's so much interest in this topic. Me too. So see, this is the most to me, or I don't want to hierarchically speak about the constructs. They're all really important. But I find neuromotor function and social cognition to be very rich constructs to think about because they get so little attention academically, and they're so important for kids to be able to participate. I will just post the scales that I find on the top of the Moodle page under resources, Robin, because I see you're interested in it as well. And that way, anybody who's interested, and I'm not going to vouch for these being the best scales for sensory because I don't know enough about the field. But they are scales, and so they'll kind of show you the basics of what is screened for in an OT screening, and hopefully that'll give you a little bit of insight. Yeah, so the other thing I know from experience, our textbook has some screens. The Revealing Minds? I don't think so. But if you find it, let me know. I don't know about that. I do know that the idea of OT is obviously slightly tangential from the constructs. However, it's very close. It's so integrated into motor function that I think we'd be remiss not to even mention it. So I would just keep an eye out. So we have 2 minutes, so I want to let you guys go in a couple minutes. But here's my suggestion to anyone who's interested. And I know we have a lot of early grade teachers too, so there's lots of opportunities to observe in the next week or so. Between now and the next time we're together, I would just encourage you to watch kids' motor function through this lens of what's a difficult motor task as opposed to what's a non-preferred activity. So there's that kind of standard, he doesn't feel like doing it, she doesn't want to, they're avoiding, and they are potentially avoiding tasks. But I just encourage you, take a motor lens for a minute and see if there's anything that comes up for, it's not going to be all kids, it'll be like 1 or 2 kids in particular. Observe where their struggle is, and if you have any kids that have adaptive supports like pencil grips or things like that, just start to kind of see if you can hone in on how neuromotor function is operating in your classroom in terms of kids' relationships to the tasks that they're asked to do. It's really eye-opening, I find. Right. So, exactly. So you hear that it's just non-preferred, but it's a communication on the part of the child. And just as people were picking up on, assessments are often assessing something different than what they claim. So a math assessment of word problems is likely assessing reading, right? Motor function is implicated in almost any task kids are asked to do at school, and especially written tasks, and it's almost never acknowledged. So tune into it and see what you find out. Why not? Okay? Does anyone have any questions before, or comments or anything that you really want to kind of make sure we all see or think about before we go? Then I say, have a nice week. It's so nice to have you back. I really did miss you. And I'll see you next Thursday also, this time, same place. Have a good week, delightful participants. I'll see you soon.